One thing that comes to mind when it comes to combat systems in video games is which ones are my favorite. I like to talk about these systems because to me, they're very critical that I'm able to kind of, appreciate every single one of them because they're all different. Every developer wants to be unique in their own way. And so a game like Jedi Fallen Order has combat systems that I really, really adore and enjoy. And so does other games that I'm going to showcase in this particular video. In fact, the culprit at hand is Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. We're going to be talking about this combat system today. We're going to be learning a few things as to how this combat was, in my opinion, put together and what the combat is telling us. And we're going to go ahead and juxtapose this with a game like Gotham Knights. Gotham Knights usually gets criticized about its combat systems. A lot of people say things like, the combat is clunky, the combat is not fun, all of these different things. But at the end of the day, when you actually take these combat systems from different video games and take them for what it is that they are, I strongly believe that you will be able to appreciate all of them and still see the strong points in them and even the weaknesses if you actually really do have enough time to see and find the weaknesses. So here's Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. I'm using the Celebrimbor skin in case you're wondering. And this combat system, right off the bat tells you that it does want to follow that free flow system that the Arkham games brought. And instead, they not only did that system in a very cool way, they were able to bring some finishers that, this game desperately could use. And those finishers are, in my opinion, one of the very fun, satisfying parts of this particular title. I mean, it's insane how, your ranger is able to go ahead and do some really crazy finishers. And there are a huge variety of them. And it really does make the combat so cool that you really have to admire how it is that they've done things. Another really cool thing that you have to pay very close attention to is this combat system emphasizes your combo meter, which is basically your combo counter. Sorry, I said combo meter. Your combo counter basically is able to count how many hits you're able to, deal in succession. So you as the player, if you really want to go for achievements and stuff, you'll prioritize that and make sure that your hits are precise so that this way you're not just spamming, buttons all over the place. It's a way for developers to be able to tell you, hey, calm down and don't spam because this is a spammable combat system. You can literally spam your way through this combat because it automates a lot of your attacks. It almost auto targets every single attack that you do. And that's one thing that the developers have done to make the combat intuitive and so on and so forth. So you can pretty much just go ahead and just start, whacking bad guys and moving all over the, arena and countering and fighting and whatever it is. But the combo counter is supposed to help you be more disciplined because if you hit the counter button at the wrong time, you can, or you are at risk of, basically resetting your combo counter. And if you basically do say, or, some attack when, you're not necessarily in the position to do an attack and, maybe an enemy NPC kind of, is not there, or maybe you're standing around and you don't go ahead and keep attacking, then the combo counter resets. So these are a few ground rules. There are also a few things that you notice here with this combat system is the enemy NPCs are, basically in a sense following a logic system. Whenever there's a horde around you, it seems like they have to behave in a specific way, which is, hey, we only need 1 or 2 people to attack this guy at the same time, or we need 3 people to attack you at the same time. So you'll notice that all the enemy NPCs are following that, what do you mean? What do I call it? They're following that logic. It's invincible. It's like a little thing in the middle of this whole arena saying, hey, attack this guy, but only attack him when there's this amount of time. Then the projectile characters, they just don't care. They just keep throwing their spears at you and so on and so forth. And so the enemy archetypes are somewhat limited. You have your grunts, you have your projectile ones, and then you maybe have your bosses that have weakness and so on, weaknesses of different kinds and so on and so forth. So these are some of the core elements of the Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor game. You can also maybe drain health from another one. Just a few really cool things that the combat does have. And then as you continue to unlock your skill tree, you eventually get to a point where, you can do some really, really crazy stuff as the game goes on or as you progress as a character. You'll also notice that the animations are decent. They're not phenomenal animations, but they are going for a much more realistic sense. So when you actually play the game and you focus on, how many hits you're getting and you're focusing on your combo meter, you'll realize that you're actually fighting the combat in a sense where you want to emphasize you using your sword in a much more realistic sense. So it's not really fast. It's not Wolong fast. You know what I mean? Or it's not Sekiro fast, where everything is just moving at lightning lightning speed. It is a very directed and calculated combat system that is, in a sense, representative of the character that they're showing you. So the Ranger and Celebrimbor, basically very, skilled swordsmen. And that's one thing that I really do like about the combat. And this is just the basic level of this particular combat system. Now, a game like Gotham Knights, where does it come into the conversation? Because, one thing about Gotham Knights, and one thing I think Gotham Knights, really does have to deal with when it comes to conversations about these two games. Let's go ahead and minimize Middle Earth real quick, and let's get that into frame. For everybody to be able to see both of them in real time, if I don't throw my mouse away, is Gotham Knights does not emphasize a lot of the things that Middle Earth does emphasize. As much as, many may have wanted Gotham Knights to be representative of, this particular system having a counter button and so on and so forth, both combat systems are already different. So no combo counter, no counter system in the traditional QTE sense where there's an indicator that says, hey, push this button right now to counter this enemy that's coming to hit you. And so all these systems are just different. Many of you also remember I emphasized this, particular comparisons with Assassin's Creed Odyssey in my last video. If you haven't seen that, I recommend that you go watch it. And this, in my opinion, has brought people to say, because these elements are not in Gotham Knights, it seems to make it inferior, or it reduces the enjoyment that you can get from Gotham Knights. Now, I strongly disagree. You guys already know that, because if you kind of think about it, there is a speed and a pacing that Gotham Knights has that a game like Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor does not have. You could play the game and do whatever you want, or both games, but at the end of the day, in order for you to fully appreciate the games, you do have to kind of, in a sense, follow the core mechanics and how the developers have developed things. In Gotham Knights, the discipline you must apply is not in just making sure that you attack in a much more calculated way. It's that you actually time when you push your attack buttons, basically the time strikes, right? And then you also are able to kind of like discipline yourself on how you use your momentum abilities as well while you're in combat. This is something a lot of people don't necessarily talk about. They say things like, oh, well, I don't necessarily think that, your time strike is actually something that's actually, making you powerful and so on and so forth. They don't necessarily talk about that. They don't talk about your wind-up frames and your animations, all those things that you must master in how you control your character. And these are the things that make Gotham Knights stand out and make Gotham Knights unique. I'm looking at both combat systems and I'm like, from a gameplay, visibility perspective, both games look like they can be fun in their own context. There's nothing like making one superior or inferior than the other. And I hate pitting developers against, one another. In fact, I'm just trying to highlight how both of these combat systems, they have differences, but both differences can be very much enjoyed overall. And it's actually pretty cool at the end of the day to see how both of them work. I'm also using Robin as the example here because he'll probably be the closest for me. And the way that he plays also gives you so much more. Yes, you don't have a counter button, but you have, projectiles that you can pretty much launch. And those projectiles, you can build them in very fun ways. With Robin, you can build his, little frost or cryogenic setup where a lot of what he does can freeze enemies in place. Really, really cool build that you can put together. You can do a poison build. You can even do a poison build on Middle Earth Shadow of War. I don't know if you can do much with Shadow of Mordor. I haven't beaten, any of them. It's insane. I know I just play them all the time, but there's just never been time to beat them since I first started playing them like 6 years ago. It's insane. I started playing Mordor even more than 6 years ago, like 7, almost 8 years ago. And so these are some of the things that you can appreciate when you're looking at these different combat systems. When you're taking a look at them and looking at what really does make them unique, it goes to show that game developers can really take their design philosophies to whichever direction that they want, and people can find enjoyment in them. I think the biggest challenge with the gaming community was, in their minds, if the game did not have this hard, fast system that they wanted or always wanted to see, then the game was in a sense inferior, which doesn't make any sense to me, because if you think about it, every game has to have its unique features. And I really do appreciate how the developers at Warner Bros. Montreal were able to bring their own system and their own take on what combat could look like in a video game, allowing for you, when you get to a high level of play, to be much more disciplined rather than just be, in a sense, following a much more scripted orchestrated, in a sense, combat system that's rhythmic. That's what you get with the Shadow of Mordor and some of the Arkham games. You have that rhythmic system that kind of like allows for you to strike, counter, strike, counter, whatever it is you want to do. You can go ahead and do with games like that. You can even do the same thing in Spider-Man. We're going to look at Spider-Man in a different video very soon. But this game allows for you to be able to go ahead and dictate how the combat flows. And you also have to, in a sense, let the enemies dictate how the combat flows. You see, the enemy archetypes are also a really big deal. The enemy archetypes here really do push you away from just, constantly doing the same thing, because many of them behave differently. Like if you get close to a projectile character, they eventually try to hit you. Or in a sense, if you're, the drone characters, they will dodge, or sometimes depending on the drone, controllers, they will hit you too. These different behaviors allow for a unique and a dynamic set of gameplay, aspects in Gotham Knights that you can't necessarily get too much of when you're playing a rhythmic combat like the Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War games. So ideally, when you ask and say, which combat is much more superior, it's a matter of preference at the end of the day. Because yes, Shadow of Mordor does have its own combat system. People love it. People like it. But then Gotham Knights seems to be one of these combat systems where unless people are able to kind of engage with the systems on a much higher level, then, or at least pick out a character that they feel like is able to, provide a playstyle that's customized to them, then they're in a position where they're, going to be somewhat confused as to what this is. And the beauty of Gotham Knights is, Gotham Knights actually is the one game out of a lot of these other games that gives you multiple playstyles that you can actually choose from. And I say this, and I want to make sure that I highlight these, points in my videos, because when you actually consider and think about all of it, it to me makes sense that this combat system on the right with Gotham Knights has a lot to offer and provides a lot of depth to it. So not only are we going to play the rhythmic combat, not only are we going to, allow for the open world to be able to give us some leverage and, how we are actually playing the game, but the character that we choose is also just as important to the play style of you as the player, and even how enemies respond, and how much more you're capable of doing with each different choice that you make in your character selection. It's actually pretty cool. This is, in my opinion, and I mentioned this to somebody in my audience, the best archetype or the best picture that you can get for a tabletop RPG if you were maybe playing Gotham Knights as a tabletop RPG, because each character can do some really cool things, which I did mention that I was going to do a video on this very soon, and I will, just give me a little bit of time, folks. I'll get around to it. But that's pretty much my little analysis on just looking at different combat systems, looking at how projectile systems work. I have, both videos playing for you, and you can see how you can leverage, the different mechanics in both games. But at the end of the day, it's really cool to see that the things that we enjoy in some games, and the things that some other games have been able to put together are not so distant. They follow some similar, rule setting in terms of how developers go ahead and, put their games together. But then at the same time, preference and, the player choice in how they want to approach the game, or if they even want to approach a video game because of its combat system, is really what does set the pace overall. But I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section. I guess your own opinions would drive which combat system you prefer the most, and why. Or maybe you'll be seeing the difference right in front of you, and you'll probably be able to say, you know what, they're both just so different that you really, this is not necessarily going to do too much. I don't know what good it would even do to compare both of them in an apples to apples sense. So we'd have to admit that we are comparing apples to, pineapples in this case. Maybe, Shadow of Mordor being the pineapple, or, Gotham Knights being the apple, or whatever you want to call it, or the orange. But this is pretty much how we get to see a lot of these different games. And I'm really excited to talk about this in different, settings, because a lot of my thoughts and opinions about Gotham Knights, from the explanation of the combat system and so on and so forth, I've shared a lot in this video. I think it's time to start, doing comparative analyses, even though they're not going to do, a one-to-one comparison for different video games and their combat systems, and seeing how, Gotham Knights is able to get the job done. All right. I'll get out of your hair. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching the video. I really appreciate you guys' time and audience, and hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.